Poor Waitress, paid for a homeless man's café. The next day, he returned in a suit, saying, "I own this place." Morning broke gently over Portland, Oregon, wrapped in a light dusting of snow. The sky was pale, the air sharp and dry. A cold wind pushed flakes across the windows of a small café nestled between two brick buildings. Above the door, a wooden sign read "Maple and Steam," creaking softly in the breeze. Inside, the contrast was stark. Warmth radiated from an electric fireplace tucked in the corner. The mellow hum of jazz piano floated from the speakers. The scent of coffee and pastries filled the air, wrapping around patrons like a familiar blanket. The place wasn't polished, but it was real, cozy, familiar. Elena moved behind the counter with practiced grace. At 25, she'd worked the morning shift for over 2 years. Her blonde curls were pulled up high with a worn blue ribbon. A soft cream sweater peeked out from beneath her apron, and around her neck hung a delicate necklace with a silver musical note, her mother's last gift. Her smile, though warm, carried a quiet weariness, not the kind born of missed sleep, but of long-held burdens. Orphaned at 17, Elena now lived with her ailing grandmother, who underwent dialysis 3 times a week. Once, she had studied piano and music theory, but left school when the medical bills grew too steep. Since then, her life had been about survival, bills, shifts, caretaking. Still, she carried it well. Elena wiped tables, filled mugs, offered soft smiles. One regular gave her a nod. She returned it without missing a beat. Then the door slammed open. A gust of wind rushed in, scattering napkins and stealing the warmth from the room. Everyone turned. A man stood in the doorway. His coat was threadbare, sleeves fraying, his boots soaked and cracked. Snow clung to his beard and cap. His red chapped hands trembled as he pressed them together for warmth. He didn't speak. He just stood there, taking in the space like he'd forgotten what warmth felt like. Before he could step further, Jace, 20 years old and always on edge, rushed over from the counter. "Sir," he said sharply, loud enough to turn heads, "this isn't a shelter. You can't just come in here to warm up." The cafe fell into an uncomfortable silence. No one looked directly at the man. A few customers glanced down at their laptops. The air hung heavy with expectation. Elena looked up from the espresso machine. Quietly, she walked over and placed a steady hand on Jace's shoulder. "We have empty tables," she said, her voice calm but clear. "He's just cold." Jace hesitated, clearly frustrated, but backed off with a shake of his head. Elena turned to the man. "There's a table by the heater. It's warmer over there." He looked at her, confused. After a beat, he gave a small nod and slowly made his way to the far corner. Elena went back to the counter, poured a fresh cup of coffee, and selected a warm blueberry muffin from the display case. She placed them on a tray and carried them to the table. The man blinked at the offering. "I didn't order anything," he said, voice dry and low. I don't have money." "It's on me," Elena replied. "Just drink it while it's hot." He stared at the cup as if it might vanish. Carefully, he wrapped both hands around it, eyes closing for just a second as the heat soaked into his skin. He looked up, emotion flickering across his face. "Thank you," he whispered. Elena smiled, then returned to her duties, saying nothing more. The man didn't know her name. She didn't know his, but his name was Caleb. And though Elena couldn't have known it then, her small gesture would change both of their lives. He remained there, shoulders hunched, clutching the mug like it was the only warm thing left in the world. Across the room, an elderly woman noticed. She watched Elena walk past and gave her a quiet, knowing smile. Elena smiled back before moving on. She didn't pause, didn't think twice. To her, it was just a cup of coffee, just one act of decency. But the silver note resting at her collarbone shimmered faintly in the cafe's soft light. Like it, too, could sense that something new had just begun. Late morning drifted into early afternoon, and the hum of maple and steam softened. The breakfast rush was over, leaving behind a few scattered patrons, a couple by the window, 2 students buried in textbooks, and the man in the corner. He had barely moved since Elena served him. His coat still held damp patches, but his hands had regained some color. The half-empty coffee cup sat between his palms. He hadn't asked for more. He hadn't said another word. Elena watched him in passing, between refills, between wiped-down tables. Not with pity, but with quiet understanding. The kind that comes from knowing how quickly life can fall apart. Her phone buzzed in her apron. She stepped into the back and answered. "Miss Elena," said a nurse's voice. "Your grandmother just finished her dialysis. She's doing okay, just a bit weaker than usual today." Elena closed her eyes briefly. "Thank you," she said. "I'll come by after my shift." She ended the call and pulled her scarf closer. It was old, woolen, with a faded lavender scent. Her mother's. It used to bring comfort. Now it was armor. Back on the floor, Elena moved toward the table near the heater. The man was still seated, still silent, eyes fixed on the curling steam from his cup. There was a calm to him now, something reclaimed. She reached for a plate nearby, but his voice stopped her. It was rough, unused. "You're the first person," he said slowly, "who looked at me like a person. Not a problem." She turned, startled by the softness beneath his words. "I just think," she replied, "everyone deserves a morning that's not miserable." He nodded faintly. "I used to run a place like this. Not quite the same, but close." She blinked, intrigued, but the bell at the counter dinged. Someone waited for their cappuccino. "Excuse me," she said, and walked away. She didn't see how his gaze lingered on her, like he was trying to remember something he'd once known. Moments later, a voice cut across the low jazz. "Is this what this place has turned into?" A man in a suit stood near the window, one hand still on his laptop. His voice was sharp, performative. "I bring clients here," he said, gesturing toward the corner. "And now you're letting homeless men loiter?" Elena walked over calmly, towel in hand. "He ordered coffee," she said evenly. "He's sitting quietly, bothering no one." The man scoffed. "This is why places like this lose customers. You let them in, and the rest of us leave." Elena didn't blink. "We're not losing anyone," she said. "You're free to stay. Or go." He bristled, grabbed his briefcase, and stormed out. The silence that followed was brief. The students glanced over. The couple exchanged a look. Then the jazz resumed. The man in the corner watched Elena as she passed. He didn't thank her. He didn't need to. Later, he stood to leave. Still stiff, but a bit steadier. Elena was busy at the counter. He didn't interrupt. Instead, he folded a napkin with care and placed it next to his cup. When Jace cleared the table, he picked it up first. "Weird," he muttered. "It's like art." He handed it to Elena. Drawn on the napkin was a steaming cup of coffee. From the steam rose a single musical note. Beneath it, in neat, deliberate handwriting, were the words, "Not everyone who plays music has an instrument, but you are music." Elena stared at it for a long moment. She folded the napkin, gently, and slipped it into her apron pocket. She did not know his name, but something inside her, a quiet part that had been silent for years, had just begun to hum. It was Tuesday morning, and the snow had finally stopped falling. Outside, the city glistened under a pale winter sun, the sidewalks shining where salt had melted the ice, and the storefronts gleamed beneath a soft blue sky. Inside Maple and Steam, the buzz had returned. The regulars were back, the early risers and laptop workers, the retirees with crossword puzzles, the couple who always argued softly about bagel toppings. The smell of espresso lingered in the air, mingling with the sweetness of cinnamon rolls just out of the oven. Elena moved through it all smoothly, like a quiet rhythm running underneath the noise. She smiled as she poured lattes, wiped down counters, and called out names. Her hair was tied as always in the same soft curl and the same blue ribbon, though today a few strands had escaped around her cheeks. Her left hand occasionally rubbed her right wrist, tired from days of back-to-back shifts, but she kept smiling. The bell above the front door chimed. Heads turned not out of habit, but from instinct. Someone had just walked in who didn't belong to the usual background noise of the café. He was tall, clean-shaven, with a charcoal gray suit that fit perfectly along his shoulders. His coat was buttoned, his shoes polished. His presence felt deliberate, not flashy, not loud, but undeniable. Jace, who rarely looked up from the espresso machine unless a tip was involved, nearly tripped over himself. "Good morning, sir," he said, voice eager. "We have a great spot by the fireplace if you'd like to sit. Very warm." The man didn't respond right away. His eyes were scanning the room. They landed, finally, on Elena. She had just turned from the counter with a tray in her hands when she saw him, and froze. Her fingers tightened around the handle of the tray, her breath caught in her chest. For a second, it felt like the world tipped slightly on its axis. It was him. The man from 3 mornings ago, the one with the tattered coat and snow on his beard, the one who held a cup of coffee like it was life itself, the one who left behind a napkin with music drawn in steam. He looked nothing like he had then, but it was him. The man stepped forward, past Jace, and stopped at the counter. He looked at Elena, his expression calm and steady, as if he had known this moment would come. "My name is Caleb Montgomery," he said clearly. "As of this morning I've completed the purchase of this café." He paused, then added with quiet finality, "I'm the new owner of Maple and Steam." Silence. Forks hovered mid-air, laptops stopped clicking, even the milk steamer hissed itself into stillness. Jace blinked. His mouth opened, then closed again, like a goldfish in an expensive aquarium. Elena stood motionless, the tray in her hands trembling ever so slightly. Her thoughts collided, ricocheting inside her like hail against a window. She felt every eye in the café shift to her, and yet all she could see was Caleb. His hair was neatly combed now, his face shaved, but the eyes, those were the same, thoughtful, tired, and grateful. "I owe you a coffee," he said to her, voice softer now, "and a thank you." She said nothing, could say nothing. Her lips parted, but no words came out. The napkin was still folded inside her coat pocket, pressed next to her chest. She felt it now, as if it had warmed somehow since sunrise. Caleb didn't push. He simply nodded once and turned to take the table near the fireplace, the one he had sat at just days before, but this time not as a stranger begging for warmth. Elena stood still behind the counter, watching him settle into the chair. The ribbon in her hair trembled slightly as she exhaled, still not quite sure whether she had just stepped into a dream or out of one. After the last customer left and the chairs were flipped onto tables, Elena wiped down the counter, glancing at the clock. She was running late. Her grandmother would be waiting. Caleb had been quietly stacking chairs when he spoke, his voice low but clear. "If you're not in a rush, would you sit with me, just for a moment, at the old table?" Elena paused. She looked at him, clean-cut now, well-dressed, yet still carrying a weight in his eyes that didn't come from his clothes. After a beat, she gave a small nod. They sat across from each other in the same corner where he'd once clutched a steaming cup with trembling hands. The hum of the city outside was distant. Inside, it was quiet. "I never thanked you properly," Caleb said. "Not just for the coffee, but for the way you looked at me, like I mattered." "You did," Elena said simply. Caleb offered a faint smile, then took a deep breath. "My name is Caleb Montgomery. I used to work in finance, investments, strategy. I was successful, by the world's standards. But the thing I loved most wasn't the work. It was coming home." He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a worn photograph. It showed a smiling woman with soft eyes, arms wrapped around a laughing little girl in a pink dress. "My wife, Grace, was a music teacher. Our daughter, Amelia, was 6. She was already writing songs. The world felt full then, loud, messy, but bright." He paused. "I was in Chicago for a conference when it happened. Rain, a red light, a drunk driver." Elena's breath caught. They were gone before I even landed. He didn't cry, but the way he held the photo, gentle, reverent, said more than tears could. I kept going for a while. Then I stopped. The house was too quiet, the world too loud. I gave everything away, disappeared. Not because I lost everything, but because I no longer cared to keep anything. I wandered for 3 years, he said, city to city, café to café. I wasn't looking for help. I was, I don't know, looking for a sign that I hadn't disappeared entirely. He looked at her, eyes steady now. Until you. Elena couldn't speak. Her fingers curled slightly around the edge of the table. Then Caleb reached into his wallet and unfolded a small, creased sheet of paper. It was a child's drawing, faded but vivid. A little girl's scrawl showed a woman with blonde hair, wearing a necklace shaped like a music note, handing a cup of coffee to a bearded man in a knit hat. She drew this a few weeks before the accident, he said softly. I never understood why. We didn't know anyone who looked like that. I thought it was just imagination. He looked at Elena again. But then I saw you, that day, and I felt like I'd stepped into her drawing. Elena raised a hand to her mouth. Her eyes glistened. She looked down at the necklace resting against her collarbone, the same musical note. There were no words, just a thudding in her chest. Not fear, not sadness. Something older, something sacred. Caleb stood, folding the paper carefully. I didn't buy this café to prove anything, he said. Not to the world, and not to myself. I bought it because this is the only place in years where I felt human again, where someone saw me and didn't turn away. He hesitated. I want it to be that kind of place, for others too. Elena sat still, hands in her lap, her heart a quiet ache. Outside, the wind picked up. Inside, the room felt full, not of noise, but of something heavier, truer. She didn't yet know what would come next. But for the first time in a long while, she wasn't afraid to find out. The café was quiet again the next morning, but this time, not because of a snowstorm or sleepy customers. The front windows were covered with brown paper. A ladder leaned against the wall where the old maple and steam sign was about to be taken down. Inside, sawdust floated through the sunbeams, and the scent of fresh paint mingled faintly with the ghost of espresso. Elena stepped in, hesitantly. She had received Caleb's message the night before. Just a simple invitation. Would you stop by the café tomorrow? I have something I'd like to share with you. He was already there, dressed more casually than before. Jeans, rolled-up sleeves, and a flannel shirt. A tape measure hung from his pocket, and his jacket was tossed over a chair. It was the first time she had seen him without the sharpness of a suit, and something about it made him seem younger, less like a man who had survived unimaginable grief, more like someone trying to build again. He smiled when he saw her. Thanks for coming. Elena nodded. Her hands were in the pockets of her coat, gripping the lining. I've been thinking a lot about this place, Caleb began, gesturing around the room, and about what it could be. He walked slowly as he spoke, like he was painting it in the air with words. This café, it saved me. Or maybe you did. But either way, I want it to be more than just a business. He turned to her. I want it to be a community café, a space for people who've been lost, overlooked, or written off. A place to land while they get back on their feet. Training, fair pay, dignity, no questions asked. He took a breath. And I want you to manage it. Elena blinked. The words hung in the air like steam over a cup, both inviting and overwhelming. She started, then stopped. Her heart was beating too fast. I'm not qualified, she said at last, shaking her head. I don't have a degree. I've never run anything. I don't know how payroll works. I don't even have health insurance. Caleb didn't flinch. His voice remained steady. Elena, I didn't choose you because of a resume. I chose you because when you saw someone no one else saw, you didn't flinch either. She looked away. You looked at me that first morning like I mattered, not as a project, not as a burden, just as a person. Elena pressed her lips together, then ran her hand down the front of her apron as if trying to wipe something away, nerves, doubt, the heat rising in her chest. I can't be what you think I am, she whispered. Caleb smiled gently. "You already are." But she didn't answer. Couldn't. Her feet were already moving toward the door. "I should get going," she mumbled. "My grandmother's dialysis ran long today. I left her soup on the stove." She didn't look back. The door clicked shut behind her with a softness that felt heavier than a slam. That evening, the sun had dipped, and a chill crept into the air again. Elena returned quietly to the café, not to talk, not to reconsider, just to retrieve the wallet she had left behind in the coat room. The lights inside were dim, and the smell of fresh varnish still lingered. As she stepped in, her eyes fell on the table near the fireplace, the same one from before, where so much had changed and started. There, waiting for her, was a small cupcake. On top, resting delicately in the frosting, was a tiny chocolate shaped like a musical note. Beside it sat a folded piece of paper, handwritten in strong, careful strokes, for the one who kept music alive in her heart, even when life tried to silence it. Elena stared at it, unmoving. Then she smiled, just a little. The kind of smile that sneaks up behind grief and taps it gently on the shoulder. She didn't eat the cupcake, but she took the note, and she didn't throw it away. It was late afternoon when the envelope arrived, thick, cream-colored, with her name written in dark blue ink, careful and unmistakably personal. Elena stood by the small kitchen window, still in her worn café apron, the smell of lentil soup on the stove behind her. Her fingers trembled slightly as she opened the flap. Inside was a folded sheet of music. At the top, in neat block letters, read the title, "The Kind Cup Sonata." Beneath it, a single-page handwritten note. "I do not know if you still play, but if your hands remember, this is for them, for the hands that placed a cup in front of me and reminded me I still had one." Caleb. She stared at the note for a long time, then ran her fingers gently over the lines of the music, chords and melodies she had never seen before, but somehow felt familiar in their intention. Warm, restrained, waiting. Her coat was already on her shoulders before she noticed she was moving. The café was still under renovation when she arrived. The front sign was gone, only wooden scaffolding and the faint shadow of the old name lingering against the brick. Inside, the tables had been cleared to one side. Paint cans stood half open, brushes left soaking in jars. But in the far corner, under a drop cloth, was the old upright piano. Elena walked toward it as if pulled by gravity. She uncovered it gently, her hands brushing the dust from the keys. The bench creaked familiarly beneath her weight. She unfolded the sonata and laid it in place. Then she sat there, staring at the sheet, until her breathing slowed and her fingers settled. The first note was hesitant, soft. Then another, then a full chord, low and minor. It was not a grand piece, not full of flourishes or showy passages, but it moved like breath, rising, falling, trembling just enough to feel real. As she played, something began to shift inside her, not break, not shatter, but unfold. She hadn't touched a piano in over 6 years, and yet her fingers remembered. The warmth of a G major chord, the sweetness of a sustained E, the pauses where silence said more than any melody could. Each measure was a conversation between who she used to be and the woman she was now. Halfway through the second page, she didn't notice the man in overalls, standing quietly at the front of the café, hammer in hand, frozen mid-step. The new sign, whatever it would be, could wait. When the last notes rang out, lingering just above the hum of the city outside, Elena let her hands fall into her lap. Her shoulders shook. A single tear slid down her cheek and landed on the A key. She did not wipe it away. It wasn't sadness. It was release. The kind that only music could offer. The kind that didn't ask for explanation or permission. Elena looked down at her hands, the same hands that had poured a cup of coffee for a stranger, the same hands that had carried groceries up 3 flights of stairs for her grandmother, the same hands that had held silence for far too long. Now, they played again. And as the light dimmed across the room, painting golden lines across the piano's chipped lacquer, she whispered, not to anyone in particular, "I still remember." And somewhere, she thought, Maybe that was enough to begin. A month later, the paper came down from the windows. Freshly painted in soft cream and forest green, the cafe reopened with a new name carved in wood above the door, The Kind Cup. Below it, a small brass plaque read, "Serving coffee and compassion, 1 cup, 1 person, 1 moment at a time." Inside, the bones of the cafe remained, mismatched chairs, soft jazz in the background, but the air felt warmer, like it remembered kindness. Elena stood behind the counter, no longer in a borrowed apron, but in a navy blue uniform she'd chosen herself. Near the collar, a single stitched music note. Her blonde hair, tied as always with a sky blue ribbon, caught the light when she moved. She looked like she belonged. Not because life had grown easy, her grandmother still faced dialysis, and the bills still came, but something inside her had steadied. It had stopped waiting for everything to collapse. It had begun to root. In the corner by the fireplace, Caleb had built the dream wall. It was a corkboard framed in reclaimed wood, tucked between the shelf and the heater. On a table below, a tin of colored pins sat beside note cards and markers. Elena had drawn the instructions herself. Write a wish, a hope, a dream. Big or small, we'll hold it for you. The wall filled quickly. I want to finish my GED. I want my mom to forgive me. I want to adopt a dog and name him Pancake. One afternoon, Elena noticed a card pressed shyly in the corner. The handwriting was small and hesitant. I wish I could remember the lullaby my mom used to sing. I only remember the way it made me feel. She stared at it a long time. The next morning, that guest returned and froze. Their dream had been answered. Above the note, in a simple wooden frame, hung sheet music, an old lullaby, "The Moon Always Finds You," printed cleanly with the title handwritten in soft blue ink. No name, no announcement, just quiet kindness. Caleb was around more now, though never loud. Sometimes he came early to adjust a wobbly stool or fix the lighting. Other days, he sat near the window with a sketch pad, sipping coffee like he wasn't observing the world. He never gave speeches. But Elena noticed the small things. He always brought an extra pastry for the mechanic with grease-stained hands. He spoke gently to the boy in headphones who never looked up. And once a week, he asked Elena if her grandmother needed anything from the store. There were no declarations between them, no confessions. But something was unfolding, slow, soft, like music played pianissimo. One afternoon, as Elena wiped down the espresso machine, Caleb walked by and placed a mug by the sink. Her usual hazelnut latte, still warm. On the side of the cup, drawn in black marker, was a tiny heart inside a music note. Neither of them mentioned it, but when she turned, their eyes met and held. That evening, after the last customer left, they stood together behind the counter. The snow outside shimmered gold beneath the streetlights. They didn't speak. Then Caleb reached up gently and adjusted the blue ribbon in Elena's hair where it had started to fall loose. His fingers barely brushed her. The gesture was quiet, but it spoke. Elena didn't flinch. She smiled. Some things didn't need to be said aloud. Some stories weren't told in words. They were written in stillness, shaped by small gestures, shared glances, silent warmth, the trust of presence. And here, in the soft light of the kind cup, that kind of music finally had a place to play. 1 year later, the kind cup had become something of a legend in Portland. Nestled on a quiet street, it was no longer just a cafe. It was a refuge, where kindness was on the menu and people left lighter than when they came in. Sunday afternoons were known as Open Music Sunday. Anyone could perform: students, retired teachers, the shy kid who used to just sip cocoa and hum. The dream wall was now packed edge to edge, dreams overlapping like ivy. Many were addressed to Elena. Her grandmother still went to dialysis 3 times a week, but her strength had returned. She often visited the cafe, claiming the seat near the fireplace and calling Caleb, that restless man who's always adjusting furniture. Her approval had arrived quietly, like most of life's truest things. One golden afternoon in early fall, the cafe stirred with quiet excitement. A handwritten sign near the register read, "Kindness has a soundtrack, a night of music and memory." Elena, dressed in a soft blue dress that matched her ribbon, was hosting and performing. When she sat at the piano, the cafe hushed. Even the milk steamer fell silent. She played the Kind Cup Sonata, the piece Caleb had once given her. Now it had grown, gentler, fuller, with crescendos that rose like morning sun. Amber light spilled through the windows. Caleb stood at the back, watching, hands clasped, unmoving. As the last note faded, the room erupted in applause. A few people wiped their eyes. Elena stood and bowed slightly before stepping off the platform. Caleb met her halfway. He didn't speak at first, just handed her a small wooden box. A carved music note adorned the lid. Inside was a delicate silver ring with a pale blue stone, the same color as her ribbon. Caleb didn't kneel. "I didn't come here to run anymore," he said softly, his voice calm but certain. "I came to stay, if you'll have me." Elena stared at him, heart fluttering. Her voice shook slightly. "I think I've been waiting for someone brave enough to walk into my life with a cup of coffee." She nodded. Caleb slid the ring onto her finger. No one clapped. There was no spotlight, just warmth and quiet understanding. Two people choosing each other, gently. Later that week, life at the cafe settled back into its rhythm. Espresso steamed. The bell above the door chimed. The dream wall grew. Behind the counter, Elena and Caleb worked side by side. He didn't say much, but always looked for her first. She laughed more easily now, and still tied her hair back with the same ribbon. Above the fireplace hung a framed sketch. A blonde girl handing a steaming cup to a man in a worn coat. Below it, stitched in soft thread, were the words, "Love begins with a cup of coffee and a gaze without judgment." The final moment arrived one quiet morning. The cafe door opened to a rush of cold wind. Without looking, Elena reached out and found Caleb's hand. He gave hers a gentle squeeze. The screen faded to black. A final message appeared. Kindness does not only save others, it saves us too. If this story stirred something in you, a memory, a hope, or just a quiet reminder that kindness matters, then you're in the right place. At Soul-Stirring Stories, we believe love often begins in small, unexpected moments. If you want more tales that lift your spirit and warm your heart, hit that, subscribe and tap the hype button to support the journey. Your support helps us keep telling the stories that whisper truth and beauty into the noise. Until next time, stay kind, stay human. We'll see you in the next story.